I want to ask you a question. What do Shark Week, Crimson Tide, and the Red Sea have in common? Now, some of you may be thinking, well, they're all associated with water, and you'd be close. You might be thinking they're all associated with the color red, and you'd be even closer. The fact of the matter is, these are all common euphemisms for one's period. And despite how common having a period is, many folks tend to shy away from the topic. Let me try to put this into perspective for you. According to the CDC, an estimated 2% of Americans every year will develop pink eye. 17% will contract food poisoning, and up to 20% will develop the common flu. And though certainly not fun to have and extremely important to get treated, most folks are at least familiar with and comfortable talking about these experiences. However, according to the National Library of Medicine, up to 25% of the global population menstruates every month, and yet we don't talk about it. Unfortunately, though, this isn't anything new. Throughout history, many societies and cultures have used menstruation as a means to isolate women, bar them from various ceremonies and activities, and some have even used it as an argument for the inherent inferiority of women in comparison to men. But I don't want to talk about why periods are plagued with such negative stigmas. There are already incredible people out there doing amazing work in that area. I want to talk about what we can do to destigmatize menstruation, because not only is it foundational to our survival as a species, but it is one of the very few things that is present in all time periods, cultures, religions, class statuses, and even geographic locations. If we want to destigmatize menstruation, we must follow 3 steps. And the first step is talking about it. Though seemingly quite simple, many folks tend to struggle with this one, so let's practice. This is 10-year-old me. One morning, 10-year-old me woke up to use the restroom and was horrified to see what looked like a crime scene had just happened. As I frantically called my mother into the room, she gently informed me that I had just started my first period and had now become a woman. Of course, I had no idea what that meant, though. I just knew it sounded important. But I was really rather fortunate. Just a few weeks prior, my 5th grade class had been split by gender, where we were shown videos about the exciting new changes we would soon be experiencing, that we were entering into this new and weird thing called puberty. Afterwards, we were told not to talk to the boys about what we saw, and needless to say, the following recess was incredibly awkward. But once again, I was fortunate. In a 2021 study of American menstruating students, only 43% of respondents said that periods were openly discussed in schools. And for many boys throughout the country, the majority of their menstrual education came informally from their peers and was frequently inaccurate. But when you think about the fact that every month up to 1 in 4 people are menstruating, it just doesn't make sense that we would try to sweep this under the rug. For example, take a look at these ads for menstrual products. What do you see? All of these advertisements portray menstruation as something to be hidden, discreet, and secret. But presenting menstruation as something confidential affects people on a massive scale. I know personally I was incredibly nervous to talk to my parents and my doctors about my period, and many other menstruators struggle with this too. What if my period is different from theirs? Or what if they think I'm weird because I mention it? Will people think I'm weak because I admit that I'm struggling with it? These are just a few of the pressing and draining questions that menstruators face regularly, and it's not without cause. In a recent study performed by Dr. Tomi Ann Roberts, a professor of psychology at Colorado College, female actors were hired to participate in filling out a questionnaire. In some of the cases, actresses were hired to then either mistakenly drop either a hair clip or tampon. Afterwards, the other participants were then asked their opinions of the actresses. And it was found that consistently and regardless of gender, those who saw the actress drop a tampon rated her as being less competent, were more likely to objectify her, and were less likely to even sit next to her. But when you think about it, isn't it weird that this was all it took? This was all it took for people to change their perspectives of these women. And unfortunately, this phenomenon is even more prevalent amongst those facing things like poverty or medical complications. As of today, 20 states in the US still tax menstrual hygiene products as luxury items. And believe me, the irony of that term is not lost on many of us. Additionally, many shelters throughout the world are not able to provide those in need with things like pads and tampons. For lots of these folks, menstrual hygiene products are amongst the first things to be removed from the budget when money gets tight. They can then become reliant on things like rags, toilet paper, and sometimes even leaves or nothing at all. If we want to destigmatize menstruation, we must open up and talk about these stories. Which brings me to step 2, listening. This is 12-year-old me. One day, 12-year-old me was sitting in class when I developed a pain so severe I could no longer breathe. I was pushing back the tears in my eyes as it felt like my insides were being sliced into. So bad was the pain that the teacher actually stopped the entire lesson just to see if I was okay. But naturally, I couldn't admit to him, and the rest of the middle school class for that matter, that I was having cramps. Not only would I be publicly admitting that I was menstruating, but I was worried that they would think I was just being dramatic. After several more of these experiences, I was taken to a doctor where I received a medical diagnosis for endometriosis at the ripe age of 13. This is a chronic condition known to affect about 5 to 10% of women globally and occurs when the endometrial tissue grows outside of the uterus. It has no cure and has been known to cause things like abnormal menstrual cycles, extreme cramping and pain, and in some cases, even infertility and death. What I didn't know is that it can oftentimes also be hereditary, and that my mother, along with generations of women in my family before me, had also suffered from this condition. Because of that, I was then able to use their experiences to recognize my symptoms and seek the treatment that I needed. But it shouldn't take generations of suffering to get help. Additionally, not all menstruators have this luxury. There are other conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS and adenomyosis, which are even more prevalent and can make the experience of menstruation that much more difficult and that much more painful. Additionally, receiving a diagnosis can be even more difficult for those who are menstruators of color, who may identify as transgender or non-binary, and those without regular access to medical care. If we want to end the stigmatization surrounding menstruation, we must listen to those who are experiencing it and work to provide them the support that they need. Which brings me to step 3, taking action. This is 21-year-old me. When I was 21, I became more comfortable talking about periods. I was blessed during my time in undergrad with mentors who supported me in the seemingly odd and rather taboo topic of menstruation. During this time, I learned a lot about different perspectives and approaches to the topic, and I was blessed to even share some of my research. And though we certainly don't need everybody to conduct extensive academic research into the topic, being proactive in educating ourselves and responding to that information is vital. So what can you do? You can work to understand what periods are, rather than what you may have simply been told. Most folks don't realize that menstruation can sometimes be very complicated and varies from individual to individual. Luckily, though, there are countless resources out there that do an incredible job at explaining them in a way that is both easy to digest and understand. You could also work to donate menstrual products to local shelters and schools. Like I mentioned earlier, there are many who have to go without these items, and most folks don't initially think about donating them when they think about helping those in need. You could also partner with organizations that are actively working to dismantle things like luxury taxes and other potentially harmful pieces of legislation. These are movements that require lots of support, so the more people are talking about it and getting active, the more likely they are to be taken seriously on a massive scale. Or you could simply evaluate your own use of the term period and think about whether or not you're using it in a way that could perpetuate negative connotations. Either way, I encourage each of you to take at least one step towards reconceptualizing menstruation, because the fact of the matter is, it's important. If it hadn't have been for the menstruators who have come before us, none of us would be here today. So the next time you hear someone shy away from the word period, ask yourself why, and then speak up. Because the more we talk about it, the more we embrace the strength of the generations that have come before us. Let us not leave behind a legacy of shame, but one of both empowerment and joy, because menstruation can no longer happen in the shadows. So the question I want to leave you all with today is, what conversations will you have to change the stigma? What ways will you support those who are trying to make a change? And how will your courage make tomorrow a better place for all of us? Thank you.